Could the coronavirus pandemic provide an opportunity for relief in Yemen? On the 5th anniversary of the start of the war, the UN urges a truce and a return to peace talks. What are the prospects of ending a conflict that has destroyed the lives of millions of Yemenis? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. Much of the world's focus is on the growing coronavirus pandemic. And as the war on the disease is stepped up, the United Nations is calling for a ceasefire in other wars, such as in Syria and Yemen, saying people should focus on fighting the outbreak, not each other. The warring sides in Yemen are cautiously backing the UN's appeal. 5 years of conflict have killed at least 100,000 people and created the world's worst humanitarian crisis. 24 million people, nearly 90% of the population, need urgent food aid. And the fighting has intensified, as Hussain Al-Bukhaiti reports.
March 2015 and the Houthis push into central Aden and begin expanding their influence not only in southern Yemen, but over most of the country. President Abdrabbu Mansour Hadi fled to Saudi Arabia, where he called for a military intervention by Arab nations. On March 25th, a Saudi-led coalition launched their military campaign to oust the Houthis. Operation Decisive Storm further expanded, targeting military installations, airports, missile defense systems, and ammunition depots across the country. But it was Yemeni civilians who bore the brunt of war. The UN and international aid agencies accused the Saudi-led coalition of indiscriminately bombing populated areas. In the last 5 years, thousands of people have been killed, and Yemenis don't have enough to eat. With warnings of famine, Yemen is described as the worst humanitarian crisis in the world.
The needs are acute, and it is essential that the level of assistance that we are currently providing is maintained to ensure that the situation doesn't deteriorate. It's an incredibly precarious situation, and humanitarian aid is a lifeline for millions.
Saudi Arabia and the UAE said their goal was to defeat the Houthi rebels and restore Hadi's government. But the scope of their involvement raised many concerns among Yemenis. The UAE supports militias in the south that operate secret prisons where detainees are tortured. The kingdom's hugely expensive military campaign has failed to oust the Houthis. Saudi officials accuse Iran of supporting the Houthis, the Shia rebel group that rose to prominence in 2014 when it took over the capital Sana'a with the help of former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. The Houthis, also known as Ansar Allah or the Partisans of God, have repeatedly launched cross-border attacks targeting the oil-rich kingdom. They have expanded their territory by taking control of Al Jawf province near the Saudi border, and fighting is intensifying in the oil-rich province of Marib. Forces supporting exiled President Hadi are retreating after suffering a series of setbacks.
We've seen 40,000 people just in the 3 months of this year who have been displaced. Now they're being forced into desert-like conditions in overcrowded camps without access to water, without access to sanitation. And this is really putting people's lives at threat.
The UN still hopes to convince the warring factions to implement the terms of the agreement signed in Stockholm 2 years ago. As the feuding sides fail to reconcile their differences, the stalemate is likely to claim more innocent lives. Hussain Al-Bukhaiti, Al Jazeera.
Let's bring in our panel, and joining us from Yemen's capital Sana'a is Hussain Al-Bukhaiti, a journalist and commentator on Houthi affairs. From Gothenburg in Sweden, Afrah Nasser, a researcher on Yemen for Human Rights Watch. And from London, Elisabeth Kendall, a senior research fellow in Arabic and Islamic studies at Pembroke College at the University of Oxford. Welcome to you all. Elisabeth, let me ask you first. Is the timing right, do you think, now for people to heed the UN Secretary-General's call for a ceasefire? Might conditions on the ground mean there could be one?
I think there is now an opportunity in this awful adversity. Now really is the time, as the United Nations Secretary-General and the Special Envoy have both said, to lay down the weapons before an even greater catastrophe engulfs Yemen. If ever the two main warring sides needed an excuse, so to speak, to start to pull back from their very intransigent positions, this is it. And they could be statesmanlike, they wouldn't need to make excuses. It's very clear that the urgency of the moment gives them an opportunity to really behave in a way that, for once, puts the people of Yemen first. Now, I don't think that this is at all an opportunity to solve the long-term issues of Yemen's war, which are very complex, none of which have been really addressed. But it does certainly give everyone an excuse to get around the table, to get into political discussions, to allow the UN to step in and broker the beginning of a long-term solution.
Afrah, do you sense the conditions are right for a ceasefire?
I think if not now, when then? It should be now, and I think this is a perfect timing, a very convenient timing for the warring parties, especially the Houthis and the Saudi-led coalition. And I would say it's even more appropriate for Saudi Arabia. I think a lot of people claim that Saudi Arabia is really struggling in winning this unwinnable war, and this is a perfect timing or a perfect opportunity for Saudi Arabia in particular to have some face-saving opportunity or a sort of an excuse where they can get an exit point from this war without losing face.
Hussain, some might argue that the Houthis have the upper hand at the moment. Would they be interested in a ceasefire?
Yes, they have the upper hand and they are ready for any ceasefire. Let me remind you that 4 months ago, President Al-Mashat here in Sana'a has announced a unilateral ceasefire from Sana'a to stop attack Saudi Arabia. But he said that Saudi as well must stop their airstrike. Till now, Saudi has not recognized, neither said yes or no to this truce. But here in Sana'a, they are willing for any ceasefire. If they are asked to stop fighting in the next 5 minutes, they will do so. Is actually Saudi Arabia who doesn't want actually any ceasefire. And even though now we see that Ansarullah, the Houthi and Yemeni army have the upper hand, they have gained more territory. The President Al-Mashat yesterday have said that the end of the first stage of the great pain of Saudi Arabia, and he said we are entering the new stage if the Saudi will not stop their war against Yemen, and they are welcoming any truce that will stop all fighting across Yemen, and the blockade should be lifted, especially now with the corona spread. Yemeni people need urgent help and urgent aid from outside.
Elisabeth, you touched on the intransigence of both sides in this conflict, but if the Houthis have got the upper hand, they've taken control of the northern province of Al-Jawaf, they could be launching an assault on Marib. Why have a ceasefire now when they are in this position of strength?
Well, the problem here is that no side ever figures it's the ultimate optimal time for a ceasefire. At some point, the sides do have to sit down and talk and agree a ceasefire and think about the future of the country. And really, if Saudi Arabia is not willing to accept that the Houthis do in fact control territory in which the majority of the population of Yemen lives and have to be part of a power-sharing government ultimately, then when? Because as Afrah says, this is the time. Don't forget, Yemen has already seen over 2 million cases of cholera. One can only imagine what the coronavirus would do to Yemen at a time when the health sector is in ruins. Now is the time for everyone to sit down and make this ceasefire and to think about how they can iron out these very elusive questions about how power, territory, and resources will be shared between the varying sides in Yemen, not just the Houthis, not just the coalition and the Hadi government, but also the Southerners, currently led by the Southern Transitional Council. Everyone needs to get round a table and talk.
Afrah, there's some 800,000 internally displaced Yemenis around Marib, and there are Houthi fighters heading there. What are the consequences there if there is no ceasefire?
Catastrophic. If a coronavirus outbreak happens in Yemen, will be given the level of displacement and also the level of the water, the lack of water, and then midst of fighting by Houthi will be absolutely catastrophic. It will be like rubbing salt into wound, because Yemenis have been suffering, facing cholera outbreak and other various diseases since 2016. About over 1 million people have been infected of cholera. About 3,000 people have died already of cholera. So it will be absolutely catastrophic. And I think I want to refer to one point we were talking about, like how this opportunity could be an important timing for Saudi Arabia. But I think even for Houthis, I think especially given that the humanitarian relief operation could be hampered because of the lack of travels globally and also into Yemen, I think it's very important for Houthis to understand that they can't milk international aid money for too long, and there has to be a new way of making, of having governance and making an income for let's say quote unquote their state. So I think it's for both sides. They have to rethink how they can make use of this opportunity and really save millions of people of suffering, and also for the warring parties' interests themselves.
Hussain, the outbreak of cholera in Yemen didn't really do an awful lot to stop either the Houthis or the Saudi-led coalition to provoke them to stop fighting. Why would the coronavirus this time round, you think, be good for a ceasefire?
I think it's a good chance, because we see that the coronavirus is all over the news, and it had spread in many countries who have advanced healthcare, like in Germany, in China, and US. So just imagine if it will reach Yemen. The government here in Sana'a have taken some measure to try to stop coronavirus from entering Yemen. Just as an example, they have requested Aden to stop all flight from coming to Aden. And even though there was 1 to 2 flights coming a day, and sometimes the Saudi is not allowing the flights, as soon as coronavirus started to spread around the world, Saudi Arabia were sending and allowing 4 to 5 flights to come into Yemen. It looked like that Saudi Arabia actually want coronavirus to spread in Yemen, as they did with cholera, with the blockade that's on Yemen. And I just want to mention, of course, some people might wonder why the Houthi have now the upper hand. They want truce. I just want to say that when Houthi offered the truce 4 months ago, it was after they strike Baqiq oil field in Saudi Arabia. They were strong at that time. They could strike it again, but all the time before they take a big action, they always try to reach peace. About Marib, if you can give me a few minutes, Sana'a government here, they have offered Marib a truce on 3 conditions. That they have to open the road between Sana'a and Marib. Marib government should not obstruct the oil and the gas flow to Yemeni population in Sana'a, and they should not be a base for the Saudi forces to target areas under the control of Sana'a. Marib has not responded to this truce, neither have said the yes or no. So now, as we say, the decision is in their hand.
But very
if they
quickly,
don't want any advance toward Marib, the Houthi has requested those three requests from them. If they not accept them, I believe that in the coming weeks we will see a major attack against Marib.
But very quickly, Hussain, obviously the Houthis have offered that ceasefire. It's not entirely altruistic. I mean, you need economic relief as well. The conditions for your people, for the Houthis, are pretty dire as well, aren't they?
I mean, here the civilization here in civilians in Sana'a and other areas, they suffer from the gas shortages because Saudi Arabia is not allowing Marib government to send constant supplies to Yemeni civilians. I mean, the Houthi are not going to make any profit from that because all the gas that's coming here, it's bait for the gas company in Marib. But Saudi Arabia, by blocking the gas and oil from coming into Yemen, they can as well control the flow of gas and oil that come in through Hodeidah port. They want to have pressure on Yemeni civilians. They think that the Yemeni will go on like a revolution against the Houthi. But at the end, if you see 5 years of war, Houthi now are stronger. They have more weapons to strike deep inside Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. And Saudi and United Arab Emirates is becoming really weak, and they are exposed what they are doing in the south. They don't really want to bring Hadi back. They are establishing militia and other armies that does not recognize Hadi government.
Okay, Hussain. Elisabeth, it's the UN that's made the call for a ceasefire, but the UN's really struggled to mediate this conflict in Yemen. Are they, do you think, still the best brokers for this? Should we be looking elsewhere, other Gulf countries, or an alternative to the UN?
Yes, I can understand why many now look at the United Nations and think this war has gone on for 5 years. Many people saw it coming for many years before that. Why on earth have they not managed to find a solution? So confidence is low in the UN. But think of it like this. They really had a poison chalice. I think that things have massively improved since Martin Griffiths took over as special envoy. Progress has been made. A peace agreement of sorts, a ceasefire, was signed in Stockholm in 2018. It was very vague and it's been difficult to implement. And things haven't got too much worse. And so at least the UN is neutral. It's very hard to find other neutral players in this. I think that the UN is still everyone's best bet, but what it needs is international pressure behind the coalition partners and other warring sides in the war to bring them to the table so that the UN can work its magic. And at the moment, particularly with Western economies so reliant on arms sales and, for example, in the UK, concerns over Brexit and wanting to keep our allies in the Middle East, no one really wants to bring that high pressure to bear. But in short, I think the UN is still the best bet for this.
Afrah, things haven't got much worse since the signing of that peace agreement in 2018. Could the UN be better? Is there a better broker than the UN, do you think?
I hate to disagree with Dr. Elisabeth, but here I would disagree. And I think it's not only the UN. I think it takes everyone to end the suffering of millions of people in Yemen and find some political resolution that took into consideration also accountability measures and redressing all the injustices that victims and their relatives have been facing in this 5 years long war. But I think there has to be a political will from the UN Security Council, for example, that they need to establish a new resolution that takes more balanced and comprehensive approach to the new reality inside Yemen. And also we need a political will from the neighboring countries to Yemen. So in the Gulf countries, there has to be an understanding that what is going on in Yemen, it will backfire eventually. If there is for example, if there is a COVID-19 outbreak in Yemen, it will absolutely backfire to the other neighboring countries. So there has to be a new initiative, let's say from Kuwait, from Oman, to come up with a political settlement. And also, the third important aspect here, it requires a political will from the domestic warring parties inside Yemen to find some sort of political settlement for a power-sharing government, say, or anything similar like that, where Houthis, Hadi, the STC, and others can find an end to the suffering of millions of Yemenis. So it takes everyone to find a solution for Yemen.
Elisabeth, I do need to ask you about the Saudi-UAE relationship. Both of them seem to be looking for a way out of the Yemen quagmire. But how are there strains in the relationship between the two? We know there's a very good personal rapport between the leader of the UAE and the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia. But other than that, are there strains that could also affect any ceasefire?
Yes, you're right to raise this. There certainly are strains. Now, of course, we did see the Riyadh agreement being signed in November last year, which papered over the cracks in the coalition and enabled their two proxies on the ground, being the Southern Transitional Council, supported by the UAE, and the Hadi government, supported by Saudi Arabia and nominally also by UAE, to mend their differences. This was just a cosmetic solution. It kicked the can down the road. None of the underlying issues have been solved. And the Southerners still, at least the proportion of them represented by the Southern Transitional Council, still want secession as their ultimate goal, and the Hadi government doesn't. Now, so I think it's very important to highlight that there are various fractures within the coalition. And even if a ceasefire were achieved, there are other problems that will knock into effect. For example, what will happen to all the soldiers and militias, of which there are dozens of militias, who rely on the war for their livelihoods? What will happen to all those corrupt officials who rely on the war and the war economy to fill their own coffers? And what will happen when they have to try to share government with the Houthis? There are so many problems down the road. We haven't even seen the technocrat government that the Riyadh agreement promised come into force yet. So the idea of more than a two-way north-south, a three-way north-south Houthis, and an even multiple way bringing in federal regions government seems almost beyond reach. But that's what the UN has to try to reach for, and that's what this current crisis gives an opportunity to start on.
Hussain, aren't these reports of divisions in the anti-Houthi camps sort of just what the Houthis want to hear? Why have a ceasefire now? Surely can't they see that they could have potentially go for control of the whole country again if they carried on pressing as they are now?
I think they will do that at some time, but because they know that there will be a huge destruction of cities like Marib and other area, they always try to show the Yemeni people that we have offered peace. To show, for example, people in Marib and people in the south that we have offered Saudi to stop the war. We stop attacking Saudi Arabia, but the Saudi one who was responsible for this. But what's happening between the coalition is exactly shows that the coalition has entered this war not for the sake of bringing Hadi back into Sana'a. We know that United Arab Emirates is running secret prison in the south. They occupying Socotra Island, and they are making new bases, army bases in the coast of Yemen. This is because the control of Yemen is not to bring Hadi, and I think Yemeni people has come to a stage that they have realized what the United Arab Emirates. We see that United Arab Emirates is targeting the first ally of the Saudi-backed forces, which is Islahi, the Muslim Brotherhood. So I think that at one point maybe Yemenis will actually unite with the government in Sana'a, because Sana'a has offered as well a pardon for anyone who's coming back to Sana'a, and there are many people, hundreds and thousands of people are coming back to Sana'a and areas under the control of Sana'a. And I believe at one stage, and especially this
Hussain,
year, Houthi are upgrading their anti-aircraft missiles. And I think if they succeeded in stopping
Hussain,
Saudi fighter jet, after that they will not offer any truce.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, time has caught up with us. So much more to cover on this subject. We will be back on it again. But for the moment, thanks to all our guests, Hussain Al-Bukhaiti, Afrah, Nasser and Elisabeth Kendall. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.